Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form, and it's by a brand that I'm pretty sure this is the first ink I've tried. Stipula, which I'm pretty sure is an Italian brand, so yay! I'm an Italiophile. I make no apologies. Now, it's Sepia. However, and this may just be a personal thing, but this isn't necessarily the color that, for me, evokes sepia. I tend to think of that as slightly more golden and maybe a bit lighter. However, this is a very lovely shade of brown. Now, the two pens I used were these. This is a Knox Galileo in broad. Actually, I think this has cayenne in it. And this Pilot Kaküno, which is sadly out of commission, because you might be able to see that wonkiness at the end of the nib. Yeah. I was flicking it, trying to dry it out, and it flew into a cardboard box and stuck into it like a dart on a dartboard. So I keep it around just until I run out of tests that I used it on. Anyways, that's embarrassing. So this ink, I actually had several comparable ink colors. I made myself sort of narrow it down. I think there was like 7, but yeah. So anyways, here's Stipula Sepia. And here's Mont Blanc Toffee Brown. As you can see, it's maybe a little bit darker. This one has a little bit more yellow in it. This is Private Reserve Chocolate Brown, which again is maybe a little darker. This one maybe has a little bit more yellow in it. And Noodler's Beaver, which you can tell is definitely a little bit more red, but is not darker, so yeah. There you go, there's comparables. I wanted to see what this ink could hold up against, so here are some tests. Now this was interesting. The bleach really just turned it like a pinky red. This is 1/3 bleach solution, and it didn't fully move it. You can still see where that ink was. Water really got it moving. The line actually stopped like right here, and then it just sort of soaked back into the paper as I was mopping it up. Ammonia pen flush, again, kind of turned it pinkish, but it did kind of get it moving, but then it started to break apart the paper and I had to stop it up quickly. Denatured alcohol did absolutely nothing, which is why I don't test it anymore. And hydrogen peroxide kind of turned it orangey. It kind of got it moving, but meh. Interesting nonetheless. Now, let's check out the chromatography, because this chromatography is actually kind of interesting. Now, here's how you're supposed to do it, which is where you put the line of ink and then instantly drop it in the water. If my camera will ever focus, that'd be great. Yeah. You can definitely tell where that drop was. You can see this sort of it's almost like a pink-brown outline, but it really moves. You get into a tan, and then a more rich brown, and then you get this blue right up at the top, which is kind of fascinating. And then here is where I let it dry, which is most certainly not how you're supposed to do this. Look at that. See that blue? The dot turned blue. And then you still have that pinky brown, and then the tan, and then the dark brown. And then you get an even more noticeable blue line up at the top. Kind of cool. Now, on to the paper test, top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. It's a lovely dark brown. And it's quite well behaved. Lovely shading. It's kind of a soft shading. It's not a really severe shading, but you do get some. Now, that Japanese medium, which writes much more like a Western fine, took 7 seconds to dry, but that German broad took 12 seconds. And you can see that that's kind of impressive when you see just how saturated this ink is. There is plenty of ink in this ink. Now, as I say here, I'd say it's just slightly wet. I'd say it's maybe a 5.5 out of 10. It just goes. However, it does seem to dry on the nib a little bit, something to be aware of, and I'll point it out in other tests. I want you to look at the color of it. See how it's slightly different? And then eventually it gets going and it's back to this. That's the broad, I put that down after doing that so I could write this, and when I picked it back up, slight color change. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. But this water test was a little weird, but I think that's just because this is from the bottom of the notebook page. It did dye the page, it did start to come apart, but some of it's still there. I think if you had to recover that, you could. I don't think there's any echo. Next up is Fabriano paper. It's 85 grams per square meter. It's not quite as smooth as Clairefontaine. It's not ceramic coated the way that Rhodia is. And it's right in between it in density. It tends to be able to handle a lot of inks that even Clairefontaine and Rhodia can't. And I really liked it. It's probably one of my favorite papers at the moment. Now, as you can see, that Japanese medium took 9 seconds to dry. That broad only took 16. And there was a good bit of ink there. I don't know if the camera's going to let me pick this up today, but you see, like right around the outline of the darkest parts, you might see a little bit of a shimmer. It's actually a little bit of sheen in real life. It just doesn't want to show up. So that's fascinating. But yeah, I mean, very well behaved ink. No bleed, no feather, no spread. I said maybe there's some echo, but I don't really see any. Maybe in the scrubby, but I mean, I consider myself very picky, and I would not hesitate to write on both sides. Yeah, just lovely shading. Just great. And here we don't really see it, the color change, but maybe I'll be able to point it out a bit better in other papers. But yeah, water test, not a lot of water resistance. You can see, I mean, it's barely there. Dyed the page just a little bit. The dots are quite noticeable, but that's about it. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. And again, really lovely soft shading, or brown color. But then when you start to lay it on really thick, it pools and you get this very distinct like separation of color. However, you do get some very soft, even shading in the writing, which is nice. Now again, that Japanese medium took 7 seconds to dry. Here, that broad took 13. Really not bad, I'll take it. Very well behaved, no bleed, no feather, no spread. There isn't any sheen. You just sort of get the start of a dark outline, but it's not really sheeny. I don't think there's any echo. But, I mean, again, I consider myself picky and I don't really see it. Now, I don't know if this is going to show up, but again, that no, it's just, I don't know, it's like a dark green gold, and then it very quickly turns back into the way it was before, so I don't know. Anyways, water test, not a lot of water resistance. I mean, that S is really gone, that E is half gone, but that T is kind of there. That Japanese medium is really, really gone. That would be very difficult to recover. Next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out dry times. It also really brings to the front shading. If an ink can sheen, it'll sheen on here. And I doubt this will show up in the camera because my camera's not playing nice today. You see around the outlines of the darkest parts, there is some sheen. It just doesn't want to show up on camera today. Oh, you kind of see it there. But yeah, it's almost like a, I don't know, is there such a thing as blue gold? Because it's kind of that. So it's an interesting contrast. But yeah, this paper is known for drawing out dry times, and it kind of did. That Japanese medium now took a whole 10 seconds to dry. But that broad still only took 20, and you can see in that smear that I didn't actually even catch all the ink on my fingertip. So that's impressive. Now there is something very interesting going on here. I don't know if it has something to do with this being Tomoe River or a cream colored paper, but I really hope this shows up. Here. There's more of a yellow in this brown, and this is much more what I think of when I think of sepia. It's got more yellow in it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. There was something about the quality of the color that I find quite enjoyable. Now, as I was setting up for this test, my cat thought all the fluttering paper was a toy. So my apologies. Yeah, let's try and just look around it. Yeah, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and that's really what happened. Yeah, actually, the camera's darkening it up quite a bit. This is so hazy, and actually it's kind of it's like a peachy color, which is amusing, but it didn't dye the page much, which was rather nice. The dots are probably the most noticeable bit of the whole thing. Now, since this is a fairly dark brown, especially where you lay it on pretty heavy, and since this paper is just so darn thin, you might have a bit of an echo issue. I don't think there's really much of anything in that regard with that Japanese medium. Maybe in the broad, and if so, it's mostly in that scrubby. But again, that might be human error. I was laying it on really thick to try and get some of that sheen so I could get it on camera. So for the next 3 tests, I just used the Japanese medium, except to write the name. And this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. This stuff is just terrible. As you can probably tell already, all hints of shading are just gone. It's just gone. And it got very woolly. Do you see that texture? It's kind of like, I don't know, it looks like wool. And you do get some feathering. So, you do get some spread. You can see the line width definitely increased. But it's not as obscene as I was expecting it because this paper is awful. I thought it would be much broader, but now I'd say it's more like a Western medium. But yeah, it's, as I say here, it's a very lovely brown, but it's not what I think of when I think of sepia. But yeah. Now, because this paper is so awful, we are going to see some little bits here and there. But as you can see, it's mostly very light, so it's hazy, which means it sunk fully into the paper, but it's not coming out the back quite yet. So, could have been a lot worse, is all I can say. Now, this is very absorbent paper. It tends to draw the ink in, make it much harder to wash out. And that's kind of what happened here. Do you see how this is very dark compared to the previous water test? So it couldn't wash it all out. However, it did make it explode. It made it inflate like a balloon. It got really big. Got kind of, even looking at it through the viewfinder, I feel like I'm not wearing my glasses or something. It's very blurry. It would not be easy to recover, especially if you're someone who has really tiny handwriting, which consists of pretty much everyone in the world but me. So, maybe try and keep it dry. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's very cheap. It's even thinner than 20-pound copier paper. It's very common for American school children. And lately, this says something about how bad that copier paper is. Lately, it's been outperforming it. So, as you can probably see the line width? It didn't get as broad as it did on the 20-pound, and the 20-pound didn't get that broad. It didn't get as wide as I thought it would, so that's not bad. We really don't have any shading, and we do have some feathering, but it's not the super, like, compared to this, it's not that bad. It's more like a wooliness that, it's more like a texture, almost, but something to be aware of. And there was some very near full bleed through, but I mean, that's the broad. And then it was these two spots where I actually, as I was writing, you know, like I went back over the line just because of where lines cross, so I feel like that's more human error. And also, I mean, when you look at how much shows through on the back on that, and how much shows through on the back on this, it's not nearly as bad. So if you're in school and you have to use Mead and you really like your fountain pens, especially if you have maybe something like a Japanese fine, this could be a very nice pairing. Do you like brown? Could work. But this paper does tend to freak out a bit when you add water, and that's kind of what we see here. Again, it kind of feathered and exploded, starts to almost overlap, so again, my advice is keep it dry. Now I was running out of Moleskin, so I had to cut apart a very tiny volant, hence the little itty bitty page. But yeah, so this is Moleskin, and I hate it because it hates ink. And days like today is why I don't have to explain why. Ugh, look at this. I mean, 4 seconds to dry. And yet that doesn't make sense because it's obviously a very absorbent paper, because look at that. I mean, it's mushy looking. It's woolly. And you get this really intense feathering. And this is me writing so small that it was uncomfortable for me to do because I tried to fit it on the page. It's so bad. But yeah, it's not good. And you don't I'd say you get some feathering, shading, but I don't really, it's not noticeable. And again, this is that was a very moderate Japanese medium, right? It's more like a Western fine. And then look at this. This rendered onto the page below in several spots. I guess I just forgot to circle them. But yeah, yeah, you're not going to be able to write on both sides. So yeah, that's way more than you like to see from a Japanese medium. Especially from an ink that's not super wet. I hate this paper. And this paper hates ink and it hates water, so when you combine the two, you get crazy stuff like this. Look at that. I mean, it starts to look like a sea urchin. It's just nasty. Yeah, don't get it wet. But my advice before that would be don't use Moleskin. So, Alright, so there you go. There's my, I'm pretty sure my first ink review from the brand Stipula. It's a very beautiful brown. I really enjoyed the color of brown. Yeah, it's not really what I think of when I think of a sepia, but again, that could be a personal thing. Looks great on premium paper. Dry times on premium paper were great, especially considering it's just mildly tiniest bit wet, extremely saturated. I wish I had gotten a little bit more of that sheen on camera because it is very beautiful. Not the best water resistance, but I do recommend at least trying a sample if you're a fan of brown. There you go. For your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.